Hey guys, guess what? In this episode, I'm going to be discussing the forwards. Welcome back once again to another episode, of course. And if you guys remember in the last episode, I discussed the possible defensive pairings that this Canes team could have with the addition of Miller. Well, in this episode, I'm going to be discussing the forward line since we did sign a pretty big free agency guy in Nikolai Ehlers. So, first things first, though, is I have a great partnership with SeatGeek. You get $20 off of your first purchase if you use promo code Caniac Reports, all one word. It's a great deal if you want to save some money for tickets that use SeatGeek. So, another thing, too, is that in a couple weeks, exactly 2 weeks when this episode airs, which is on Monday, I will be doing a Q&A. So if you have any questions, please submit questions. If I don't get enough questions, then I'm going to have to revert to plan B. I hope I don't have to revert to plan B. But if you have questions, please submit your questions. I'll also make a post about it too on Twitter, Instagram, Blue Skies. So if you ever have any questions, feel free to ask them because I'll be answering them in that Q&A episode. Also, remember too, if you're watching us on YouTube, please hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, leave a comment down below. Really does help me out. And if you're watching us on Apple or Spotify, whatever, or sorry, not watching us, but listening to us on Apple or Spotify, please leave a rating and a review. It really does help me out. So, a few things I do want to talk about that has happened since our last episode around the league is San Jose. Again, they have all the money in the world, basically, just because they need to hit the cap floor. Well, they signed a former Hurricane and Jeff Skinner to a 1 year, $3 million contract. So we'll see how Skinner does with San Jose. I think he might be a decent veteran for that team. Skinner, I mean, if you guys remember Skinner or when he was on this team, I mean, he was probably our last pure goal scorer that we had. And obviously, I wouldn't say he's at that same level as he was with us or his first year in Buffalo. But regardless, I still think he is a decent I say probably a decent bottom six type of forward. I don't think he's a top six forward. There were times where he was scratched when he was with Edmonton. So we'll see how he does with San Jose playing with those young guys in Celebrini, Will Smith, maybe Sam Dickinson joins the club finally for San Jose. So he's going to be joining a quite talented group that is up and coming in San Jose. And I think San Jose, they're one of those teams where I think in a couple years we're going to see them possibly leading the Pacific Division. I think they could be that good. So we'll see how Skinner does. And another thing too that I noticed, I actually even searched this up on Google, but it seems like sometime this week we will be getting the full schedules announced for every team. So once that comes out, I will be doing an episode based on just the schedule and see if there are any important games for the Hurricanes. So I'll be kind of dissecting that in a future episode. So just giving you guys a heads up there on that episode. And another thing too, I do want to talk about. This was stuff. Technically, he's not with Carolina anymore, but I'm sure you guys know Dmitry Orlov. He recently talked after his signing in San Jose, and apparently he talked about his mental challenges while being with Carolina. So when I heard that, I was like, I mean, obviously, I would say there was a time where he was really, really good. And I thought the best version that we saw of Orlov was probably his first year in the playoffs with us. He started out rough. I didn't think he had the best playoffs this past playoff in his most recent playoff appearance this past year, but regardless, I mean, if he wants to have like a new fresh start, I mean, I'm fine with that. The only thing that I did not like when it came to what Orlov said is he said that the coaches didn't really believe in him. And when I heard that, I was just like, really? I mean, you're on the second pair with Chatfield. That was considered a pretty decent pair. Now, I would say probably at times that pair was fighting with the Ghost Walker pair on what was technically the third or second pair. But regardless, I mean, Brendan Moore gave him quite a bit of ice time. So I don't know why he didn't. He said that the coaches didn't believe in him. I didn't really like that part, but I mean, if he wanted a fresh start and he said it was mentally challenging, I mean, yeah, he wasn't that good this regular season, but there were times where he was really good, and it's just I'm just gonna let bygones be bygones. That's just how I read it. And especially with this whole Rantanen thing too, like I have learned that not every player wants to come to Carolina, and it's not gonna. And I'm not gonna like hate on them just because they don't want to come to Carolina. I mean, I mean, when it comes to like players like Marner, because I think Marner came out saying that he was willing to waive his no trade clause to Vegas, but not to Carolina. I mean, was I frustrated with that? A little bit, just because of that narrative of superstars not coming here. But I think that narrative kind of got pushed down when Ehlers finally signed with the Hurricanes. Now, is he on the same level with Rantanen and Marner? Probably not. But regardless, he was a big name free agent, and he wanted to come here to Raleigh, and I think that helps pushing down that narrative of superstars don't want to come here. So that's just my 2 cents on the whole situation. I realize not everybody wants to come to Carolina. Listen, there are certain places in the country I don't want to go to, but it's just like I don't want to go to the specific part of the country. It's not because I hate it, it's just I just don't want to. So I'm sure there are some players that feel the same way. I'm not going to hate on someone just because they don't want to come to Carolina. I understand star players like Marner and Rantanen. I think the Rantanen thing is a little bit of a different story considering he wasn't really giving an answer to Carolina. That was my frustration. He kept saying, "Oh, I don't know," but it was kind of obvious he didn't want to stay. So that's just my 2 cents on the whole situation. So a few things I do want to talk about Carolina. In fact, a lot of connections I'm be talking about Carolina in my news segments here. But the Hurricanes, they did make some news. Some. It's not big, but they did sign a couple of prospects to a 1-year, 2-way contract. Noel Gunler will get $80,000 playing in the AHL, and if he's brought up to the NHL, he'll get $813,000. And that's a player who I don't think he makes the NHL. He's 23, 24. I think what you see is mostly what you get of the guy. And then you have Gavin Bayreuther, who's signed a 1-year, 2-way contract as well. $175,000, which is the bare minimum in the NHL in terms of contracts. And in the AHL, he gets $140,000. So those are two prospects that the Hurricanes signed. Again, it's not big news like the Ehlers or signing or the Miller trade, but they did something. So we'll see how those two players pan out. I do remember Gunler was a highly sought prospect. I liked the pick, but it just hasn't. I don't think he's going to be an NHLer. And you know what? It is what it is. You're going to have those prospects that just never are able to get over that hump and play in the NHL on a consistent basis. So that's just the reality of the situation. And another thing too, I found this out recently. I think this has been out for quite some time, but with Ehlers, apparently he wanted a full max term when deciding which team he wanted to go to. Ultimately, we know he decided to come to Carolina, but he wanted the max term. No one was going to give him that, though. I heard that Washington, the most they were going to give him was 5 years, and then Carolina, us, and part of the reason why we signed him was we were willing to give him one extra year, which was 6 years. And you know what? I think that is, again, I think that's a perfect contract for a guy like Ehlers, who is, 29 years old. I mean, if I was Joe Manager looking at a 29-year-old top six forward, I mean, I wouldn't mind giving him the full 7 years, but I would be pushing probably for 6 years just because of the age factor. But regardless, we were able to sign him. And another thing too, what's interesting with this is that two former Hurricane players decided to retire. I decided to put this in here because for those who have watched the Hurricanes, like me, since probably 2006, heck, if you're listening to us and have been following the Hurricanes uh, before 2006, that's awesome. But you guys probably know who these two players are. Zach Adolphe and Riley Nash. They both announced their retirement. And you know what? I wish them well. And I am going to put them on this episode just because they were Hurricanes at one point. I remember Riley Nash. I thought Riley Nash was a decent, probably fourth line center, but we had lots of fourth line centers. We were a bad team back in those dark ages. We really were. And Dolby, he was kind of the same thing. I mean, now Dolby, he's what I call that in betweener. He sometimes plays in the NHL, sometimes play in the AHL. That's pretty much, I think, his career in a nutshell. But you know, I wish both of those players best of luck to their retirement from hockey. So that's kind of it of stuff around the league. Okay, so this forward group I think is very interesting because I think if you look at our defensive pairs, which again I talked about in the last episode, if you have not listened to that, I would encourage you to listen to that episode as that kind of a little bit ties into this episode. But to me, the difference is when it comes to the forward group and the our defensive group is I think you can look at our defensive group and be like, okay, that's probably the finished product. I don't really see anybody moving out or coming in that's going to be part of our defensive corps. I think the most we could see is probably another depth defenseman we could sign, which I really wouldn't mind because again, you could use any team, not just the Hurricanes, could use all the depth in the world. And I really would not mind them signing another depth defenseman like a Mike Riley type of defenseman. Who I will say this, I forgot to talk about him probably in my last episode, but he's basically going to be that seventh defenseman. He is definitely going to be playing NHL games. It's going to be an 82 game season. You're going to have injuries, but that's kind of my case of Mike Riley in a nutshell. So the forward group, I think the biggest question here is, are the Hurricanes done? And I really do not think they are done. And we all know what the question is because obviously you solved the defense by getting Keandre Miller. You solved the top line somewhat scoring problem with Ehlers. Now you need that second line center. And I think there are two ways to solve this. You can solve it externally by trying to bring in a center from another team in a trade, which I think the Canes had the capital to do. I really do. Or you can solve it internally, which, if you guys remember, again, in my last episode, Brendan Moore was on the Adam Gold show recently, and he did say he was considering of either moving Jarvis or Stankoven to the second line center spot. And I really think that just shows that he just does not have any faith in KK, which I might be having an episode on just KK in the upcoming future. So because I there's a lot of passionate fans I can tell that have their own opinion on KK, whether they think that he can he can play second line center or not, or he can play fourth line center. So he is a debate entirely. But the first scenario I have here, because I have a few scenarios with our forward group, is okay. Let's see what this forward lineup would look like if this was done internally with Seth Jarvis being your second line center. And honestly, when I look at both Stankoven and Jarvis, because it seems like those are the two players that Brendan Moore is considering, I think there are pros and cons to each of them. I think when it comes to Jarvis, I think he is a player that probably is a little bit more suited, I would say, to play the second line center position than Stankoven. But if you put him there, here's the con: that you're separating that chemistry between him and Aho. Whereas if you put Stankoven up on that second center position, I mean, I'm not saying he can't do it. It's just you look at his size, and I think some people would argue, well, Seth Jarvis is small. Yes, he is, but look at Stankoven. He's smaller than Jarvis. So it's just, again, I'm not saying that he can't do it. I think skill wise, he can be that second line center. It's just, do you want someone who's 5'8"? Again, very, very small dude. I think he is talented. I really do. But do you want to give a 5'8" player with a lot of skill and a huge motor on his back to be that second line center? And I think some people, well, I'm not saying I'm in that camp or not. I think some people would have second opinions on that. So here's going to be my lineup if Seth Jarvis is that second line center. So I have Ehlers playing with Aho and Stankoven. I have Hall playing with Jarvis and Svechnikov. So that's the second scoring line. And then I have Robinson, Jankowski, and Blake. And then I have Martinuk, Stahl, and Carrier. And I have KK as the healthy extra. And I've said my views many times. I'm probably going to have to bring this up again in this episode. But based on how Jankowski played this past season, especially right when we got him, obviously that goal scoring phase kind of slowly was moving out. But regardless, I thought there's more fire under his belly than KK. And that's why I have KK as the healthy extra. So I know there are some Canes fans that probably aren't happy with that, but that's just how I view it. Honestly, I think if I were to try to dig into the mind of Rod Brindamore, he'd probably put KK above Jankowski. I'm just like, okay, whatever. Again, I think if KK, if he's not in your top six, I would tolerate it, but again, I'm just not a big fan of it. But regardless, that's how the lineup that I would want it. I know there are some people that like, hey, look, Stankoven, he played very good with Martinuk and Stahl, and you know what he did, and I didn't mind him playing with Martinuk and Stahl because he didn't really have any chemistry with any of the Hurricane players, like Seth Jarvis. When Jarvis was playing with Martinuk and Stahl, let's look at the stats on that for a second. He only scored 4 goals while playing on that line, 7 if you include empty net goals. So at some point you got to start seeing the results, and that's why I've always advocated for Jarvis to play with Aho. And honestly, even though Jarvis at times last season he played with Martinuk and Stahl, even though the eye test favors that line, the stats didn't. Well, I would say the specific stats of getting goals didn't. I probably shouldn't say in stats in general, but the stats of just getting goals didn't. So, and Jarvis is just too talented to not get goals. He just isn't. So, Stankoven, I think this is the season where I think he needs to play with players that had the same skill set as he does. And listen, I'm not trying to berate Martinook or Stahl. I think they are two great forwards. I still think Jordan Stahl is probably one of the best defensive centers in the NHL. But if you look at all of his goals, and there is some, I will admit, there is some skill. I think there's some. It's not a lot, but there's some skill with Jordan Stahl. Obviously, I think we all remember that Toronto game where he got a hat trick this past season. So there's some, but it's not a lot. You can tell most of these goals, like Martinook, comes from hard work. And you know what? One thing I will criticize probably about our top six last year is they weren't working as hard as the likes of Jordan Stahl and Jordan Martinook. So again, I'm not trying to berate those players, but they just don't have a lot of skill compared to the likes of Jarvis, Aho, Ehlers, Hall. So that's just my whole thing about it. So that'll be my lineup if this second line center question was solved with Jarvis being the second line center. Now, my next lineup is going to be in the situation of okay, well, if Stankoven is the second line center. Well, so what I have here, if Stankoven is your second line center, which I actually would not mind at all for the record, I hope he can do it. That's just how I view it. I hope Stankoven can do it because he is small. But my first line will be Ehlers, Aho, and Jarvis. And I really do think Brandon is going to put Ehlers and Aho together, regardless of who the second line center is. So that'd be the first line. My second line, I'd probably do again. This was tough because I feel like you have you can tell this team is front loaded with very gifted wingers. There's going to be kind of that odd man out that's going to be put in a bottom six or top nine type of role. And you have that second line. I have Taylor Hall, who is somewhat big. Does he play a big, mean game? Probably not, but he is big. And I think that would help a little bit. He weighs over 200 pounds. His height is above 6 foot. So he is big in stature. You have him with Stankoven and Svechnikov, who can play. I think out of all those three, I think we know Svechnikov is the guy that will play that mean type of game. But I would not mind a line like that either. And the reason why I probably put that line together is because if you do have Stankoven, a small guy, as your second line center, you need to have big bodies playing on either, I would say, at least one side, whether that's the left or right wing. But having Taylor, Hall, and Svetch, who, again, big guys, whether regardless if they play that big, mean type of style of player or not, I would not mind that line just because maybe that's enough to kind of shield Stankoven from getting mauled from the opposition. That's just kind of how I view that second line. Skill wise, that second line, I think is fine. I think it can be a very, very deadly line. But having Hall and Svechnikov kind of protect Stankoven would not be a bad idea. I really don't think it would. And then I probably have Robinson, Jankowski, and Blake as probably the third scoring line. And then Martinook, Stahl, and Carrier as the fourth line. And you know what? I really do think the player that plays with Stahl Martinook the best, I would not say Seth Jarvis. I would say William Carrier because I think he plays that style so wonderfully. The only thing with Carrier is he needs to be healthy because obviously he missed a lot of time this past season. Now, thankfully, he came back in the playoffs, but the biggest thing with Carrier, can he stay healthy heading into next season? I'm not expecting him to score lots of goals. I'm not expecting him to be a Ehlers or an Aho type of player, but I expect him to be that good defensive winger type of player, kind of the embodiment a little bit of that Jesper Foss, Jordan Martinook, Eric Robinson type of player. And you know what? I like Eric Robinson too. I've always believed you need to have a few of those rough and tumble guys, those guys that don't have a lot of skill but have a lot of work ethic. And I would consider Robinson, Martinook, Stahl, even Jankowski to some extent, Carrier as those type of players. And you need those type of players, I think, in order to win the Stanley Cup, even though if you're going to win the Stanley Cup, it's going to be because Aho, Svet, Jarvis, your homegrown players are taking over the games. I've never thought the Hurricanes, if they win the Stanley Cup, that it'd be Stahl getting the most points or Martin getting the most points. Because I don't think the Hurricanes win a Stanley Cup if you have Martinook or Stahl leading the team in points. You need to have Aho, Jarvis. I would say Ehlers is probably in that camp. Stanko and Svetch. You need to have those players leading this team in points because skill-wise, they're a lot better than the likes of Martinook and Stahl. So my Nets situation here or scenario when it comes to the forward group is okay. So let's say Moore doesn't like what he sees with Jarvis or Stankoven as his second line center. And I do think that there is somewhat in Moore's mind. I could be wrong about this, but I do think there is somewhat in Moore's mind of, okay, well, what if those two players don't work as your second line center? Then I think he'd probably go to Tom Dundon, Eric Tolsky, and be like, hey, listen, we need to solve this second line center by facilitating a trade, and because it's just not going to work with Jarvis or Stankoven. And I really do think part of that is in the back of his mind because Brendan Moore, I think he has said this before. I think he did even say this on the Adam Gold show. If he puts someone as a center, then that means that he has a lot of trust in you and your offensive production isn't going to die down from where you were as you were playing on the wing. That's how I think Brendan Moore views it. So this next scenario, I'm just going to use this as an example. I'm not saying we're going to get him or not, but let's just say we get Mason McTavish. So again, not saying we're going to get him, but I'm just using him as an example. The lines that I would have is Ehlers with Aho and Jarvis. I would have Svechnikov and Stankoven being on the second line with McTavish or whoever they get as their second line center, whether it's on who they trade for or with. And then I would say the third scoring line would probably be Taylor Hall, Mark Jankowski, Eric Robinson, and then your fourth line, like I said, Martinook, Stahl, and Carrier. And the reason why I have this type of lineup is because I believe if the Hurricanes do trade to try and solve for that second line center, it's going to cost this team. And I do realize this because a lot of insiders are saying this. It is hard to get second line centers in this league. I view the NHL as having a surplus of defensemen and wingers. And I think the shortages that we are seeing, not just in terms of the Hurricanes, but in the NHL as a whole, is you don't have enough second line centers and you don't have enough starting goalies. So it is going to be hard. So, and you're going to have to pony up the price. But remember, this Hurricanes team, they still have 2 Dallas picks left. One's in the first round, one's in the third. And you also have Blake and KK that you could possibly deal. And the reason why I say those 2 players, ever since we signed Ehlers, I've always thought there's going to be another trade. I really don't think this team is done, especially when you look at the cap space that this team has. And according to Puckpedia, this Hurricanes team has around $10.9 million in cap space. And we know with Tom Dundon, he likes to use almost all of it. Now, let's say this was the roster, but we only had $5 million in cap space, then I'd be like, okay, they're probably not going to do anything else. But with them having that much cap space, you know that they're not done. You know it. Because Tom Dundon, he might leave a few million left, which I've always thought was wise, just because you never know what this season's going to unfold, and you probably need to leave a few million for the trade deadline. But having 10.9 million, that's enough possibly from a financial standpoint to solve your second line center. And again, with the signing of Ehlers, I've always thought that the odd man out, if we were to trade someone to get a second line center, obviously I think KK is an obvious player to trade just because I really don't think he fits on this roster anymore. But the other player who I think has, and I think we all know this, he has a lot more trade value, and that's Jackson Blake. And the reason why I probably put him on the trade block isn't because of his production, but just because we have lots of the same guys as Jackson Blake. And those are the guys like Seth Jarvis and Logan Stankoven. He's another sub 6 foot player. And we already have quite a few of those. So I think because of that, he's kind of expendable, but I would not trade him for nothing either. And I think the Hurricanes know this, obviously. But trading someone like Blake, you could get probably a good piece added. And I keep hearing this on X with the term of, well, there aren't any second line centers available, which there might not. But at the same time, that is a need right now, and the Hurricanes need to fulfill that need, whether it's done externally or internally. And I also kind of heard this phrase too a lot in the fact that you really think they're going to give this player up? You really think Nashville is going to give Ryan O'Reilly up? Ottawa's going to give Shane Pinto up? And I'm like, listen, if they're getting Jackson Blake, I don't want to hear I don't want to hear it. Jackson Blake is a good player. He is fantastic. So when I keep hearing this, oh, they're probably not going to give this player up. They might if it involves Jackson Blake. Every team has their pro scouts, and they know what Jackson Blake is. He is a very good player. So I don't want to hear. I don't want to hear when these teams say, "Well, no, we're not going to give this player up, or we're not going to give this center up." They're not going to do that. They might have fixed Jackson Blake because he's good. So it's just one of those things that just irritate me just a little bit. But I do think overall, even still having KK and Blake, I do think this lineup has improved. But I will say one thing. If KK is your second line center come playoff time, I do not think this team wins the Stanley Cup. I really, really don't. If he's your fourth line center, maybe. But I don't see where in this forward group where KK fits anymore. That's just my opinion. And I think if I were to say, well, what is this lineup composed of? I would say you probably have four. This is going to be probably just a little bit tough, but I would say with Martinook, Stahl, Carey, and Robinson, I would say you have four probably third line type of players, because even though they might get fourth line ice time, and I mean, Brind'Amour's not going to do that to Jordan Stahl, but if they were, then that'd be the best fourth line out there, because I think on a team that's not on Carolina, I guarantee you, Martinook, Stahl, Carrier, Robinson, they'd be probably fighting for at least a top six type of job, if not third line players. So I view them as third line players. Jankowski, I do kind of view him as more of a fourth line depth type of center. I think Taylor Hall is kind of in a group in his own, and the fact that I think he's a top 9 player. He's not the same player as he was probably 5-10 years ago. And then I would say with Blake, Stankoven, Jarvis, you have top 6 players, and then I would say top of the lineup players. And I'll explain top of the lineup later in a bit. Top of the lineup players in Ehlers, Aho, and Jarvis. And I think you have a fourth line player in KK. So that's kind of how I view this forward group. And the reason why I don't say I say top lineup players and Jarvis, Aho, and Ehlers. This is a team that still doesn't have that star player. I am not going to label anybody in this forward group as star players until I see probably maybe Jarvis hitting 40 goals. I think if he hits 40 goals, I think we start having that discussion of him possibly being a star player. Aho, while I think other components of his game this past season were really well done, his offensive production dropped. So I don't, and because of that, I don't really label him as a star player. I just don't. But do I think that he's like a top of the lineup type of player? Absolutely. So that's kind of how I view this forward group. Again, I really don't think this Hurricanes team is done. And I hope they get it done soon in terms of podcasting reasons, just because I can get it out of the way with. But I thought this was a fun episode to do when it comes to looking at the forward group. And also, it's episode 300. So I do want to say one thing about the podcast with it hitting 300 episodes. I find that freaking amazing. Never thought I'd be doing 300 episodes of recording. Obviously, quite a bit of those was shared with Sam, if you guys remember him. Obviously, he couldn't do the podcast anymore. But I will say one thing about the podcast, kind of being just a little bit vulnerable here. I'm still thinking if I should get a new co-host or not. I probably am. Again, I'm just kind of letting you guys know what's going on this podcast here because I think you guys deserve to know. But it's going to take some time because regardless if I do get one or not, just because I want to make sure that the co-host I get is a good co-host and again, you guys get good quality type episodes. So regardless of what happens to this podcast, again, guys, I really do thank you so much for listening to the Caniac Report episodes. I really, really do. And I will see you guys Friday.